The night smelled like rain and iron. Mom's scream cut through the sound of thunder, and 6 shadows dragged her out the front door by her hair. The porch light blinked twice, then darkness swallowed everything. I still remember the look on her face. Not fear, but shock, like she knew who they were. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. It's been 15 years since that night, but it replays in my head like a film I can't stop watching. The sound of boots scraping on wet gravel. The thud when she fell. The silence after. Mom never talked about it. Not once. The police report got buried under missing pages, and we moved from one cheap apartment to another like ghosts running from our own story. I was just a kid, but some memories don't fade, they stain. Her name was Ivy, though everybody in town called her the quiet one. She worked double shifts at a diner, came home smelling like burnt coffee and cigarettes, and smiled through everything. She never mentioned my dad, only said he was gone somewhere no one comes back from. I thought that meant dead. I never questioned it. Until last winter. That's when the message came. It was just a folded note under our door. No name, no address, just 6 words burned into the paper. Your father wasn't dead. He was watching. At first, I thought it was sick, cruel. Who would do that? But then I found something strange, a small brass tag half buried near the front steps. Worn out, scratched, but the number on it, it stopped me cold. It was a U.S. Army Ranger identification plate. And below it, the name, Mason. I stared at it for hours, heart pounding. That was my father's name. The man I'd been told died 12 years ago on some mission overseas. But if he was dead, who left this? That night, the air felt heavy again, like the storm from my childhood had returned. Rain tapping on the roof, wind humming through the window cracks. Mom sat in her chair, staring at the news, but not really watching. I tried to tell her about the plate, but as soon as she saw it, her eyes widened, not in surprise, but recognition. She whispered, "Where did you find that?" Her hands trembled as she held it. I asked if Dad was alive. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked upstairs silently and locked her bedroom door. Something in her reaction told me this wasn't new to her. She had been waiting, maybe fearing this moment. When she came down later, her face looked pale, ghost white. The rain outside grew louder. I remember thinking it was the same kind of night he disappeared. I didn't know what haunted her, guilt, memories, or the truth. But I felt one thing deep in my chest. If my father was watching, it meant he saw what those men did, and he never came back for us. Why? That thought burned through my chest all night. I couldn't sleep. So around midnight, I sneaked into Mom's room, quiet as the storm outside, and that's when I noticed it. The corner of the old wooden floorboard near her dresser, slightly lifted, like it had been pried open before. My curiosity took over. I knelt down and pulled it free. What I found beneath would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, and the secret my mom had buried all these years. The floor creaked beneath the weight of my breath. Cold air slid through the open crack, carrying the dusty scent of wood and something sharper, like old gun oil. Underneath the loosened board rested a small metal trunk, faded green, patched with rust. It wasn't the kind of box you forget about. It was the kind you hide. My pulse picked up, every heartbeat echoing in my ears as I dragged it out. The top was carved with small letters, ML, Ranger. And right there, I saw something else. 2 deep scratches, forming an X across the lid, as if someone tried to destroy the name and failed. The lock was old, brittle. I used a screwdriver to snap it loose and lifted the lid. Inside lay a folded military jacket, stiff with age. Beneath that, papers, photographs, and a field diary sealed in a plastic bag. Everything smelled of metal and distance, like years of war had been trapped inside. But one thing pulled my eyes immediately, a blood-stained ranger badge, dull and cracked. It wasn't polished like in pictures. It looked real, used, hurt. The diary had water damage, but most of the words were still visible. The first page was signed, Mason L., 3rd Battalion, Ranger Regiment. My throat tightened. My father's handwriting, the curved M's, short tails, suddenly real in my hands. I sat there for hours reading fragments. Notes about night missions, cold terrains, a broken chain of command. Then the tone shifted. Pages torn. A line scrawled along one margin. You don't survive betrayal. You endure it. I didn't understand, not entirely. But it was clear, my dad's pain didn't come from war. It came from people he once trusted. Near the back, a photograph was taped to a page. I peeled it off carefully. It looked decades old. 6 men standing beside a burned trailer, all wearing faded fatigues, every face shadowed by forced smiles. My father stood on one end, but his half of the picture had been ripped off, deliberately. Something inside me whispered this picture wasn't meant to be seen. A loud floorboard creaked behind me. Mom was awake. I shoved everything back into the trunk except the photo and closed the board just as her footsteps reached the doorway. The light flipped on, stabbing through the dark, catching me half kneeling. Her face was pale as chalk. What are you doing? Her voice cracked on the word doing, like part of her already knew. I held up the picture wordlessly. She stared for a long moment before stepping closer, eyes fixed on the image. Her fingers brushed the photo tremblingly, but instead of anger, she just whispered, "Where did you get this?" "Under the floor," I said quietly. "Why would Dad's things be hidden?" She backed away, shaking her head, whispering almost to herself, "You shouldn't have gone looking for ghosts." Then, under her breath, "They were his brothers once." The way she said it made my skin prickle. I asked what she meant, but she didn't answer. She turned toward the window like she expected someone to be standing there watching. The storm had settled into soft rain by then. She walked off, leaving her coffee cup trembling on the kitchen counter. I heard her breathing unevenly upstairs long after that. Sleep wasn't possible that night. That sentence, "They were his brothers once," echoed over and over. I kept staring at the photograph. 6 men standing in front of something burned down to ash. Who were they? Why did Mom keep this hidden all these years? By morning, my chest ached from exhaustion, but curiosity had turned into something heavier, a need to uncover the truth. I scanned the photo again and noticed tiny details. A partial license plate in the background, an army emblem faintly visible on one man's sleeve. I grabbed my phone and typed simple keywords, Ranger plus unit plus Iron Ridge. One by one, fragments of names, insignia, and forgotten reports popped up. Most were old military records, but one face stopped me cold. Same crooked nose, same jawline. The man standing beside my father in the photo. A search result under his name appeared. Kyle Denton, local construction supervisor, Iron Ridge County. My heartbeat stumbled. Not just alive. Here, in the same county. I clicked on his profile picture. Older, heavier, a small scar now tracing his left cheek. The caption read, "Family over everything." My fingers tightened around the phone. Family. He had won. Meanwhile, mine was torn apart. I sat there staring until the photo blurred. By noon, Mom tried pretending nothing had happened. She made breakfast, asked if I was still upset about that dream. I didn't argue, but I noticed how she avoided the living room now, how her eyes flicked toward the floorboards every time she passed. In the evening, she caught me by the door with my jacket on. "Where are you going?" "Out," I said quietly. "Just out." Her eyes filled with something between fear and resignation. "Don't go looking for him, Logan. Let the dead stay dead." Then, softer, "You don't know what he's become." I froze at that. What he's become. She said it like Mason wasn't a man anymore, but a ghost carrying vengeance. She closed the door slowly behind me, but I could still hear her whisper something faint. "He warned me this would happen." Outside, the sky glowed dull and coppery, late autumn fading into winter. I followed the street out toward the edge of town, mind racing back to that photograph burned into my thoughts. All 6 faces blurred together except the one that matched the new name, Kyle Denton. The words from the Ranger diary haunted me. "You don't survive betrayal. You endure it." Was this what my father meant? That betrayal followed, even after death? The town was nearly silent as I walked toward the highway diner where Kyle worked. I didn't plan what I'd do or say. I just needed proof. Needed something real to touch, to replace all these ghosts in my head. When I reached the diner, I saw him through the fogged window, wiping down tables. Older now, but unmistakably the same man. For nearly 15 minutes, I stood across the road watching him. He seemed ordinary, civil, carefree. But every time he smiled at a customer, something in me twisted. It didn't look right. How could a man who helped drag my mother by her hair live a peaceful life? Laugh? Act human? Then a cold gust shot across the street, and the world flickered like a bad film reel. I stepped closer. That's when I noticed his truck parked outside, same partial license plate I saw in the photograph. That sealed it. He was one of them. My hands shook, but before my anger could boil over, I caught sight of someone else sitting in the back of the diner. A broad figure, half-shadowed, watching Kyle. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. Just stared. And when the man turned slightly, the dim fluorescent light caught his cheek. And there it was, a deep scar running down from temple to jaw, same as in Dad's old army portrait. He was older, thinner, but unmistakable. Mason. I froze on the sidewalk as the world went silent except for the echo of rain. That impossible thought hammered through me. He's alive. He didn't look up, just rose from his seat calmly, left a few dollars on the counter, and walked out the back, blending into the alley's darkness like it swallowed him whole. No trace, no sound. I ran to the alley's edge, searching. Nothing. Just the faint smell of mud and rust. But leaning against the back wall, barely visible under weak light, was something left behind. A folded photograph. The same one I had found, but this time, the missing half had been taped back on. All 6 men stood together again. Only this time, someone had written across the front with a black marker. They thought I wouldn't return. My hands trembled as I held it. The message wasn't for me. It was for them. My father was alive, and he'd started something none of us understood yet. When I got home that night, Mom was sitting in the living room with the same distant expression. Her eyes followed me like she already knew what I'd seen. I placed the rebuilt photograph on the table. Her breath hitched. She didn't look surprised, just defeated. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She closed her eyes, tears glimmering at the corners. "Because people don't believe soldiers come home different. You think they're heroes when they walk back in that door, but sometimes what walks in isn't the same man you said goodbye to." Her words landed like a stone on my chest. "He's here, isn't he?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she whispered, "He told me if I ever saw their faces again, I should pretend not to." The rain picked up outside again, hammering the windows like old ghosts knocking to be let in. I looked at the dark photograph on the table one more time. 6 faces staring into a camera, the rain distorting their eyes through reflection. Something in my gut told me the nightmare wasn't beginning tonight. It had never ended. It was only circling back to where it began. And somewhere out there, my father, the man we buried only in words, had risen from the shadows with a list those 6 men were still standing on. Part 3. Dad's Ghost Comes Home. Rain had turned the whole street into a mirror that night. Headlights glided across wet pavement outside our window, stretching in long, ghostly lines. Mom sat near the TV again, staring but not really watching. I could still feel the weight of the photograph in my pocket, the full photo now, with my father's face restored. The clock clicked toward midnight when a single knock against the door cut through the quiet. Not sharp, just measured. 3 calm taps. Mom froze. The cup slipped from her hands and shattered. She didn't even flinch at the sound. Her eyes were locked on the door, wide, fixed, like she already knew who stood on the other side. I stepped forward slowly. "Mom, who is it?" She didn't answer. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Her breathing grew shallow, memories tightening around her like invisible chains. Another knock. Same rhythm. Calm. Like someone who knew we were awake and waiting. The same cold dread I'd felt as a child crept up my spine. My chest burned. The air felt thick, holding a silence so fragile it hurt to breathe. Mom's voice finally broke, a whisper so small it almost disappeared into the room's hum. "Don't open it, Logan." But it was too late for warnings. Whoever had found us already knew where we were. The doorknob turned twice, then stopped. A man's voice, low, cracked, but steady. "Ivy, open the door." I stepped back. The sound hit like a gut punch. Soft, not threatening, but familiar. The same tone I'd only ever heard through old cassette tapes Mom kept buried in a drawer. Her knees almost gave out as she whispered, "Mason." Something inside me shattered. My father's name, spoken out loud in this house, after more than a decade of silence. Mom hesitated, then slowly reached for the lock. Metal clicked. The old hinges groaned. The door opened. The man standing there looked nothing like a ghost. Flesh, breath, rain dripping from the edge of his jacket. His hair had gone gray at the sides, skin weathered as sandpaper, eyes sharp enough to cut. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, fading under a rough stubble. He didn't smile, didn't move, just stared past me, straight at her. "Mason," she whispered again, voice trembling between fear and relief. He stepped across the threshold without asking, boots wetting the floor, eyes scanning every corner like instinct was still in combat mode. His movements were quiet but surgical, not a lost man returning home, a soldier assessing a safe house. The silence between them was unbearable, decades compacted into seconds. Finally, I spoke because someone had to. "You're alive." He turned toward me, eyes landing heavy, assessing, then softening, just for a heartbeat. "You were small," he said. Voice rough, smoke-laced. "Didn't think you'd remember me." "I remember everything," I said quietly. He nodded once, exhaling like a man who'd carried a secret too long. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in a plastic sheet, a torn piece of a photograph. My stomach dropped. It was the same one I'd found hours ago. He placed it gently on the table beside Mom's trembling hands. "It's time," he said. She looked terrified. "No, we don't need to live through that again." His jaw tightened. "They dragged you by your hair and made my son watch. You really think they ever stopped?" The word son sounded foreign in his mouth, like it didn't belong to him anymore. I stared at the table. The photographs seemed to split the air, 6 men frozen in gray memories, and my father looking at them not with hatred, but with inevitability. His voice lowered. "They thought I was dead. I made them believe it for a reason." Lightning flashed through the windows, spilling white light across the room. He took off his jacket for the first time. His clothes underneath were clean but worn, sleeves rolled to reveal faded tattoos with numbers and initials. Scars crisscrossed both wrists like geography etched from another life. He began unwrapping something from his bag, folded pages, notes, old IDs, maps. Every piece tied to one name after another. Kyle Denton, Preston Miller, Felix Ward, Tristan Cade. 6 names, 6 ghosts from the photo. Each crossed out except one, Kyle's. Mom's voice was faint. "What are you doing, Mason?" "Finishing it," he said calmly. "This isn't you." He looked at her sharply, holding her gaze. "You spent years pretending I died a hero. Stop trying to turn me into something I'm not." The air between them thickened, years of separation melting into raw, quiet truth. He started pinning the photos to the wall by the clock. Kyle, Felix, Preston, all held by rusty pushpins. I recognized one more face from online earlier. Same scar, same half-smile. Each time he placed a photo, he muttered coordinates under his breath like a prayer. I wanted to ask what any of it meant. But watching him move, precise, haunted, unshakable, told me one thing. He hadn't come home to make peace. He came home to end something. He turned back once the wall was covered. "You said you wanted answers," he told me. "You'll get them." Mom started crying quietly, her tears falling onto the floor. She murmured something about letting the past die, but Mason ignored it. He reached into his jacket again, took out a tiny metal stopwatch, and pressed the button. Ticks filled the silence. "This is all I needed," he whispered, the faintest ghost of a smile forming across his lips. "Dad, what's that for?" I asked. He glanced at the clock, eyes flickering toward each pinned face. "Reminders," he said. "Every man has his own minute, and when it runs out, so does his story." He turned to leave. Mom stepped forward, grabbing his arm. "Please, don't make me lose you again." He paused, eyes softening briefly as if something inside him almost cracked. Then his hand tightened around hers just enough to stop her shaking. "You didn't lose me," he said. "You buried me alive." And with that, he was gone, back into the storm, rain swallowing his shape until only the hollow echo of his boots remained. I stood frozen by the door. My father was alive. My childhood ghost had flesh and heartbeat again. But the man who'd walked out that door wasn't looking to rebuild his family. He was carrying their destruction in his hands like old debts finally do. Mom sat down slowly, whispering in the same broken rhythm of confession. He said, 9 minutes. He always said 9 minutes is all it takes. My chest tightened. 9 minutes for what? She looked up at me, eyes glossy with truth she'd never wanted to release. To erase what should have never happened. I glanced back at the wall, 6 faces pinned there, their smiles mocking under dim light. The old stopwatch still ticked where Mason had left it on the table. Only now the seconds felt louder, sharper, like a countdown trapped in the room itself. The storm outside deepened, wind howling against the windows like rage rediscovered. And for the first time in years, I realized our house wasn't a home anymore. It was a waiting room for something dark to return. In that moment, I finally understood. The night my mother was dragged screaming wasn't the beginning of our nightmare. It was the middle of his story, a story that hadn't finished yet. As I stared at the rain streaking down the glass, I heard myself whisper, barely audible. They thought he was dead, but he wasn't. He was counting, and time had just started moving again. The day after my father returned, sunrise felt wrong, too sharp, like the light didn't belong here anymore. The house smelled of wet wood and silence. Mom didn't speak. Neither did I. We just moved around each other quietly, avoiding the wall covered in men's faces. Each photo pinned there like a wound that refused to heal. By noon, his muddy footprints had already faded from the porch. But he left things behind, questions that breathed. The stopwatch still ticked faintly on the table, steady and cold. Every few seconds, it clicked soft reminders that he was out there somewhere, dragging his ghosts into the daylight. Mom sat at the kitchen counter, staring out the window. Her coffee had gone cold, but she held the cup with both hands like heat might return if she stayed still long enough. "You knew, didn't you?" I said quietly. "You always knew he was alive." She flinched, then nodded. No excuses, no story. Just that small nod that carried 1,000 sleepless nights. "When he disappeared," she whispered, "the army sent me a folded flag and a letter. But I never got his body. I should have known that wasn't an accident." She took a slow breath, voice trembling. "They told me he died a hero. But a week later, someone dropped a photo in my mailbox, the same one you found. Except back then, they left a message on the back. It said, 'He's not one of us anymore.'" The words made my stomach twist. "So you hid everything?" I asked. She looked up finally, eyes rimmed red. "If I told you, they'd come back. He warned me that if I ever spoke his name again, they'd make me pay for what he'd seen." What did he see? Her silence was my answer. That evening, the wind picked up again, thin branches scraping the glass, the kind of sound that fills an empty house with dread. I couldn't sit still. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like boots outside. Every headlight that passed painted our walls with ghosts. Then, a soft thud from the porch. I jerked up, heart lunging into my throat. Mom froze mid-step. We stared at each other. Another sound, heavier this time, like something sliding against the door. When I slowly opened it, the air smelled like rain mixed with oil. Nothing was there except a black duffel bag resting by the mat. No note, no name, just dirt and weight. Mom stepped back instantly, whispering, "Don't touch it." But I had to know. Inside were 6 small envelopes, each marked with a number, 1 through 6, and under them, a letter sealed with muddy fingerprints. I unfolded it carefully. They're not random. They're the ones who buried me alive and came back for you. You remember their faces, so do I. Don't stop her from knowing. It's time she remembers what they did. M. Each envelope carried a photograph. Same 6 men, but this time, each photo was marked with coordinates. Beside every coordinate, a name, a date, and a single red line drawn through the corner. Only one didn't have a line: Kyle Denton. Mom's hands shook as she stared at the list. He's not just going after them, she said. He's retracing his mission. What mission? She sank into a chair, her voice hollow. The one they turned on him for. I sat down across from her. The clock ticked, matching the faint sound of the stopwatch still running upstairs. Tell me the truth. She swallowed hard, then finally spoke. Mason led a ranger squad overseas. Operation Iron Wind. Classified search and rescue that went off book. But when they found what they were sent for, they realized it wasn't people. It was information. Enough to end the careers of a few powerful men back home. She looked at me sadly. They ordered him to destroy it. Instead, he tried to smuggle it out. His own squad turned on him before it could reach the base. 6 men against 1. They left him in the desert, half dead, told command he was lost in action. Her voice cracked as she stared past me, as if she was seeing that memory unfold. He crawled for 2 days before another unit found him. But when he came back home, he wasn't the same. He promised me he'd keep quiet, raise you, pretend it never happened. But the guilt ate at him. She paused. The night they came, those 6 men, they didn't want to hurt me. They wanted what Mason had hidden. What was it? She shook her head slowly. I never asked. I didn't need to. When they dragged me outside, one of them whispered something into my ear. He said, "You're lucky your husband's already dead. The rest of us won't be." The rain outside turned to a steady roar. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I could feel an invisible clock winding down inside this house. Mom's words barely left her mouth. "You told me he's back." I nodded. "Then he'll finish it this time," she said. "He won't stop until every one of them feels what he felt." She walked to the wall, staring at the pinned photos again. He was gone 13 years. 13 years changes a man. He doesn't know forgiveness anymore. A car engine rumbled outside. I glanced through the curtain, headlights slowing at the end of our driveway, idling in the rain. Mom's hand gripped my wrist, eyes wide. "Don't move." The car door opened. A figure stepped out, hood up, moving through the rain toward the porch light. The knock came fast, steady, determined. I reached for the door quietly, peeking through the crack. It wasn't my father. It was another man, rough face, soaked jacket, clutching a small envelope. He looked nervous, glancing back toward the road twice. "Ma'am," he said once the door opened a little more. "He told me to give you this. Said you'd understand." Then he turned, climbed back into his car, and drove off without another word. Mom unfolded the envelope slowly. Inside was one photograph. Kyle Denton, kneeling in front of something that looked like a memorial wall. Behind him, a timestamp printed in the corner, 009. Her breath hitched as she stared at it, whispering, 9 minutes. I looked closer. The man's face was swollen, eyes closed, lips stretched in regret or fear. A single line written across the image in black marker. "Forgive if you can." "What is this?" I asked. She didn't answer. She walked to the window, pressing the photo against the glass. "He found one of them," she murmured. "He's starting with the worst." Her shoulders trembled with some mix of relief and dread. Half grief, half justice. Behind her, thunder cracked again, a flash lighting up the wall of photos. For the first time since Dad's return, I noticed there were faint, wet streaks beneath each pinned face, rainwater stains dripping down like thin tears. I hadn't seen him come inside again, but the evidence said otherwise. He'd been here. and he'd left his anger nailed to our wall like proof that every man still breathing from that betrayal now had seconds marked on a clock they couldn't see. As the house fell quiet again, I picked up the stopwatch from the table. It still ticked steadily, smooth and calm. The engraved numbers beneath said, 9 minutes. 9 minutes. However long it took, my father's countdown had begun. And somewhere out there, 6 men had just started hearing time's echo, the same sound that lived under our roof. The air that morning was thick with fog, swallowing sound. Our yard looked like it belonged to another world. The wall of photographs still stood in the corner, 6 faces staring down at me, each marked with the same thin red cross except one. Kyle's was now gone. Only 5 remained. Mom refused to come downstairs. I could hear her moving around aimlessly in her room, drawers opening and closing, as if she wanted to erase every trace of him before it was too late. But the truth was, you can't scrub out someone like my father. He stays in the walls, in the silence. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't sit still anymore. Something inside me kept saying, find him before he finds you in his story. Outside, the fog burned off slowly, leaving behind damp streets and the smell of diesel. The grass was still wet when I spotted fresh tire tracks near the gate. Same direction his old duffel bag had been left. He'd been here again, not inside, but close enough to watch. In the mailbox sat a folded map, my name written on it in black marker. 2 words underneath, trust your blood. The map wasn't detailed, just 6 black lines leading from the edge of town into the woods. At the bottom, coordinates. I pressed my finger against them and whispered them into my phone's GPS. It pulled a location barely 20 minutes away. An old steel yard near the river, abandoned for years. The kind of place where echoes never leave. As I packed a flashlight and the photo of the 6 men, Mom called down from the stairs, voice raw with sleeplessness. Where are you going? Just to the store, I lied. Her tone sharpened. Don't lie like him. I stopped mid-step. The same accusation she'd buried all these years was finally spilling out. Then tell me what to do, Mom. Sit here and wait for another letter? Another photograph of someone crawling on his knees. She looked defeated. Her hands trembled against the railing. He doesn't need help with what he's doing, Logan. But if you follow him, he'll drag you into his darkness like he dragged me. Her voice cracked. He has a way of making everyone part of his mission, even when they think they're trying to stop him. I walked out before I could let her words root themselves in my head. The drive to the steel yard was lined with old signs and rusted fences. A quiet field stretched toward warehouses that looked like bones under the pale sky. The closer I got, the more I felt it, that cold familiarity, like I was stepping into the same fear that had raised me. The gate creaked open with a push. Inside, puddles reflected the gray sky, and the smell of damp metal filled the air. He was there, standing beside an old pickup, jacket zipped, eyes scanning the ground. Barely recognizable under layers of exhaustion, but the same sharp precision in his movements. He didn't seem surprised to see me. You shouldn't be here, he said without turning. I had to see where you go when you disappear. His shoulders rose and fell like he'd already rehearsed this moment in his head. You think this is disappearing? He stepped closer to a burnt-out structure, brushing his palm on the corroded steel. This is remembering. I noticed spray paint marks along the concrete, faint outlines of names. Not vandalism. Coordinates. These places, he said slowly, were parts of our old routes. We called it the ladder. Each stop meant another mission, another line of trust. And the day they buried me, they used my own ladder to climb out. He crouched, pulling a dirt-stained folder from a crate. Inside, torn maps, Polaroids, army memos. One name at the top of each, Tristan Cade, Felix Ward, Oliver King, Grant Wilcox. Every one of them had dates scribbled underneath, timelines of what he called the crawl. Only now I realized what his 9 minutes meant. Not time to kill, time to confess. He stood, wiping his hands. They'll talk, he murmured. Some louder than others. But they'll talk. Is this justice? I asked. Because it looks like revenge. He looked at me sharply. You think they gave us a court when they left me in the desert? You think there's mercy for the people who made you watch your mother bleed? His voice didn't rise, but it filled the entire yard. No, son. Justice died 13 years ago. Now it's survival. The silence afterward felt heavy, broken only by wind sifting through the gaps in the steel. He picked up a two-way radio from the truck, pressed a button briefly, then set it down. From somewhere deep in the yard came the sound of a door slamming. Footsteps. Then a man, older, limping, stumbled into view. It was Felix Ward. The face matched the second photo on our wall. Felix's eyes darted between us. You can't keep doing this, he rasped. The others are scattering. You already proved your point. Mason's jaw flexed once. You didn't run far enough. I didn't touch her. Felix shouted. I was just driving the van. Mason cut in. You think that makes your hands cleaner? The man's voice cracked. I had kids. Mason, we all did. Orders came from above. You know that. He didn't answer. He whispered something into the radio again, and from a speaker nearby, a faint ticking sound played, the same rhythmic pace as the stopwatch. Felix fell to his knees. Please. Mason didn't move closer. He just looked at the stopwatch in his hand, watching the seconds tick past. Then, calmly, he dropped it on the ground in front of him. Time's already up, he said quietly. Stand up and finish your crawl. Felix hesitated, shaking. Then, broken, palms scraping through mud and metal shards, he moved, slowly, across the ground, toward the exit gate. 9 minutes later, he was gone, sobbing into the distance. Mason's face didn't change. He turned off the radio, tucked the stopwatch back into his pocket, and looked at me. You think I hate them? I don't. I just need them to feel what silence smells like. He walked past me toward his truck. Go home, Logan. Your fight isn't mine. But I couldn't move. Something in me had cracked open. Watching Felix crawl away under that colorless sky felt less like revenge and more like a ritual eating itself alive. Dad, I said quietly as he climbed into the truck, you came back for Mom, didn't you? He froze halfway through closing the door, then looked back, eyes dark. No, I came back because she broke the promise. What promise? His gaze fell briefly before hardening again. The one where we agreed to bury what we saw. She never did. The engine turned over, headlights slicing through the mist. The smell of fuel clung to the air as he drove off, leaving only silence and rain in his wake. I stood there watching the tire marks fade beneath the drizzle. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of sirens began to echo, not close yet, but close enough to remind me that everything he did would soon catch up to both of us. When I finally got home, Mom was waiting by the window. Her face told me she already knew. Was he there? She asked softly. Yes. Her chin trembled. Did he hurt anyone? I hesitated. He made one crawl. Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from knowing it wasn't over. It's never just one, she whispered. Once he starts, they fall like dominoes. I handed her the envelope he'd left on his truck's seat, marked simply with our last name. Inside was a single folded note. Trust your blood. Stay out of my countdown. Mom stared at it for a long time before turning the paper over. On the back, another coordinate was written in faint red ink. New location. New target. The sound of rain filled the silence again as she whispered, He's not chasing them anymore. He's chasing closure. And I couldn't help but think, closure for who? For him, or for us? By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the quiet left behind felt heavier than thunder. The wall with the photos now looked like a scoreboard of sins. Only 4 faces remained untouched. Mom hadn't slept. The phone kept buzzing with unknown numbers, all ending before she could answer. She looked smaller, slouched in her chair as if fear had finally shaped her bones. The news on TV mentioned an incident at an abandoned steel yard. No names, just talk of vandalism, assault, and an anonymous witness describing an ex-military man. Every word sounded like my father's shadow moving across the city. Mom turned the TV off, He's not hiding anymore, she muttered. He wants them to see him coming. I didn't ask how she knew. She'd been inside his mind once. The version of Mason before betrayal burned the soldier out of the man. That afternoon, a truck stopped outside. My stomach clenched when I recognized it. Same one from the steel yard. Mud streaked down its sides. I opened the door expecting him, but the cab was empty except for a small tape recorder sitting on the seat, still warm, still running. A static hiss filled the air before his voice faded through. You found the steel yard. Then you've seen what guilt looks like on its knees. Don't mistake this for vengeance, son. This is restoration. His tone wasn't angry, wasn't proud. It sounded almost calm, like a man explaining how gravity works. Then another sound on the tape, distant sobbing, metal scraping against ground. His voice returned, lower now. You can't erase evil. You only return it to its owner. Silence. The tape clicked off. Mom pressed her trembling hand against her mouth. He's losing himself, she whispered. But I wasn't sure. There was method in what he did. A soldier's rhythm, not chaos. Each crawl meant something. It wasn't murder. It was message. Shame was his weapon now. Still, I had to see for myself. The coordinates from the last letter led toward the old river trail bordering the forest edge. I followed it near dusk, the smell of wet pine and diesel thick in the air. Birds had gone quiet. About a mile in, I found the truck again, parked beside a broken fence. Right next to it, the cold shimmer of water reflected a single floodlight shining against mud. I moved closer until I saw him. Mason, standing motionless at the edge of the riverbank, eyes fixed on someone down on the ground. The man's hands were zip-tied. His voice slurred from fear. You don't understand. Mason didn't look at him. He held a small photograph in his gloved hand. Felix Ward's face crossed out, and now Tristan Cade's below it. This isn't understanding, Mason said quietly. This is memory. He handed the photo to the man on the ground. You'll carry it back. On your knees. I couldn't move. I watched him step back, wordless, as the man began to crawl through mud, each drag of his arms leaving streaks toward the road. From where I stood hidden behind a tree, I saw what Dad had done. Not violence, not torture, just a mirror turned toward their past cruelty. It was almost biblical. 9 minutes later, it ended the same way, the man reaching the gravel, collapsing beside a wooden post. Mason knelt near him, spoke too softly to catch, then laid the stopwatch beside his shaking hand. And just like before, he walked away without looking back. He turned toward me then, not startled, just tired. You shouldn't have followed. I couldn't let you do this alone. A long breath escaped him. He wiped the mud from his face. Alone is how this ends. You call this ending? I asked. You're turning into what they made you. He looked at me with steady, haunted eyes. That's where you're wrong. I'm reminding them what they made. There's a difference. We walked in silence to his truck. The night smelled of oil and salt water. When we reached the door, he paused. Your mom tell you everything? No, she never will. He slid a small binder across the hood of the truck. Inside were military files coated in dust and stamped classified. Black lines covered half the text, but one section was clear enough to read. Operation Iron Wind. Termination ordered by Judge Victor Hale. I looked up sharply. I'd seen that name before, printed in local news headlines about government fund mismanagement, sealed cases, and campaign scandals. He's not one of the 6, I said. No, Mason replied. He's worse. He's the reason they turned. What are you going to do? He shut the binder. Remind him that not all soldiers stay buried. He climbed into the truck, but before driving off, he handed me one more photograph through the window, the next face on his wall. Keep it, he said, so you know who your father really was before the dirt covered him. The headlights cut through the darkness, leaving the smell of exhaust lingering long after he disappeared again. When I got home, the lights were still on. Mom sat in silence, a folded paper in her hand. Her eyes flicked up, wet but empty. He came here before you, she said softly. I froze. What did he want? He didn't speak. Just left this. She passed me the crumpled note. It was short. Next one won't crawl for me. He'll crawl for her. I frowned. For who? She looked down. A woman named Violet. She was the only one who tried to help him back then. They silenced her too. It made sense now. He wasn't just avenging what happened to us. He was unearthing everyone who'd been buried under the same truth. Mom whispered, he's turning this into a war. Outside, thunder rolled again across the horizon, followed by the sharp crack of lightning. The night flickered once, and through the brief light, I saw a figure standing beyond the window, motionless, coat soaked. Dad. He didn't knock this time. Didn't move. Only raised 2 fingers slowly, in a gesture I remembered from old photos. The ranger's silent signal for mission complete. Then he vanished into the dark again. I turned toward Mom. She was trembling. What did he mean? The next will crawl for her. She just whispered. He's going to make one of them confess what they did to Violet. He's bringing her back from the grave through shame. Is that justice? I said quietly. She shook her head, tears spilling. No, that's only the first crawl. The one that teaches the world to watch. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. Because now, both of us understood something that chilled deeper than revenge. None of this was spontaneous. Every step, every crawl, every clock ticking down from 9 was a soldier's strategy. And war was exactly what he planned to finish. The town stopped feeling like home after that night. Every corner had eyes. Every silence hummed with Mason's ghost. By morning, local news ran with headlines. Second suspect publicly humiliated in military confrontation. No arrest. No murder. Just rumors of some vigilante soldier forcing confessions through shame. The footage grainy, shaky, filmed by someone hiding behind a tree, recording one of the men crawling in the dirt yelling apologies to no one visible on screen. Mom didn't leave the house for 2 days. Blinds down, door locked, but hiding didn't keep the past out. At dusk, a car pulled into the driveway. Black sedan, government plate. I tensed, thinking maybe Mason had finally crossed a line. A man stepped out, wearing a dark trench coat, badge flashing quick before he tucked it away. His name tag read, Grant Benson. He introduced himself softly, too calm for someone investigating terror. Just looking for Ivy Hale, he said. Your mother. His tone was gentle, but his eyes had seen this before. The look of people already buried in secrets. Mom came down reluctantly, face pale, posture stiff. He greeted her like they were old acquaintances. Ma'am, we're only gathering information. Nothing formal yet. We just need to confirm. Is Mason Lee your husband? She nodded after a beat. He exhaled through his nose, flipping his notepad closed. Then I'll save us all time. He's been spotted near Iron Ridge twice, both times around the homes of men tied to Operation Iron Wind. You know that name, don't you? Her grip on the banister tightened. I know enough to stay out of it. Grant gave a faint smile, almost pity. I wish your husband believed the same. Whatever he's doing, he's not just rewriting his past. He's exposing others too high to fall quietly. Mom whispered, Judge Victor Hale. Grant's smile vanished. That name doesn't leave this house. He's protected. Something inside me twisted at that. The judge's name again, echoing like a shadow behind every photograph Dad had marked. Grant looked at both of us with careful precision. If Mason's trying to pull the truth out, you need to understand, it won't end with those men. It never does. He left his card on the table. Call me before anyone else dies crawling up your street. After he left, Mom wandered to the wall again. Now only 3 faces remained. She stared at them like ghosts looming in daylight. He's cutting through the rot one name at a time, she murmured. Grant's right. It won't end with them. The following night, I got a signal, 3 short beeps, on my phone, from a blocked number. Then coordinates. My throat went dry. They led straight to the train yard outside town. The same method. Same time pattern. The rhythm in my chest synced with his old stopwatch. Don't answer it, Mom said as soon as she saw the message. But staying away wasn't an option anymore. By the time I reached the train yard, Lights from distant towers pulsed through the fog. The metallic echo of wheels from abandoned carts rang like hollow bells. I kept moving toward the faint hum of a generator. Then I saw him, Mason, standing on top of a flatbed railcar, face half lit by the glow of floodlights. A man knelt in front of him, hands pressed into the gravel. Preston Miller, the next face from the wall. Mason's voice was so level it chilled the air. You left me there for 2 days. Did you know what heat feels like when it buries itself inside your bones? Preston sobbed quietly, shaking. Please, Mason. I had orders. I didn't. Orders? You think orders dragged my wife by her hair? You think orders made my son think his father died a coward? Mason crouched, eyes almost tender, but full of something unbending. You don't get to use duty as your grave. A loudspeaker crackled somewhere nearby. A mechanical voice, recorded, disembodied, counted down, 9 minutes. Mason didn't flinch. He only said, "Start crawling." I took a step forward before I could stop myself. Dad. He turned, eyes flickering between relief and anger. You shouldn't be here. Maybe not, I said, heart hammering. But if you're trying to teach shame, there's nothing left to learn. He's already broken. He held my gaze. Not yet. He pointed at Preston's trembling form. Look at him. 9 minutes from now, he'll remember every choice he made before his boots left that desert. Every one. That's not breaking. That's waking up. The seconds bled out steadily. Every scrape of hands against gravel sounded like history clawing through time. When the final click echoed from the stopwatch, Mason walked to Preston, kneeled, and placed the photo against his back. Now go home, he said gently, and tell them ghosts don't stay buried. By dawn, the video was everywhere. Someone else had filmed it, the crawl, the stopwatch, the quiet aftermath. The internet called it the merciful punishment. Most celebrated it. Others called it terrorism. Mason didn't care about either side. He was writing justice his own way. But that morning, I noticed something different. The faces on our wall weren't the same. The last photo, the man Mason hadn't touched yet, was gone. When I asked Mom, she said nothing. Her lips pressed tight, voice shaking. He took it himself. Who's the last one? I demanded. She swallowed. Not one of the soldiers. Then who? Her whisper came like breaking glass. The one who gave the order to bury him alive. The judge. Judge Victor Hale. The name burned through my chest like acid. She sat down slowly, pressing her palm to her forehead. Your father told me once, if I ever saw the judge's face on one of his maps, it meant the past had caught up completely. It means he's ready to die with it. The next morning, news cameras filmed outside a courthouse 2 towns away. Reporters shouting, lenses flashing, Judge Victor Hale stepping out, waving, smiling as if untouched by bloodlines. Somewhere in that crowd, hidden under a hood, my father moved like smoke through soldiers planted in plain sight, carrying his last photograph folded clean in his pocket. That was the moment I knew. Mason wasn't coming home again, not until the 9th minute ended, not until his crawl reached the final door. And without realizing it, I'd already begun tracking him, step by step, his son following his ghost into war. The courthouse incident hit the news before sunrise. 2 guards suspended, 1 fence gate jammed for exactly 9 minutes. Nobody pressed charges, but headlines screamed his legend. The Ranger makes them crawl. Mason's face didn't appear anywhere. Only flashes of boots, shadows, a voice caught on a mic yelling the same word over and over again. Confess. Mom didn't want to watch, but she couldn't look away either. When she turned off the television, her hands kept trembling. He's forcing them to tell the truth under fear, she said. That's not the man I married. But it's still the man who saved you, I said softly. Her eyes found mine, sharp with hurt. No, Logan. The man who saved me was the one who still believed in forgiveness. That man's gone. That day felt endless. The house pulsed with tension. Every distant siren made me think this was the moment they'd drag him back in handcuffs. Or worse, a body bag. But when evening fell, the lights flickered once and went out completely. Then the power surged again. The clock on the wall blinked 0:09, and that's when I knew he was near. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the front door. The air outside smelled of cold dirt and pine smoke. In the drive, something new waited by the porch, a plain brown envelope. My name on the front written in his rigid handwriting. Inside, a single photograph. It showed Judge Victor Hale shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, both dressed in combat uniforms years before the betrayal ever happened. Behind them stood Mason, blurred but unmistakably present. Written across the photo in black ink. You can't judge silence if you're the one who ordered it. A smaller note came with it. He thinks he owns what we buried. The judge will die clean, but the truth won't. I looked up from the paper toward the shadowed tree line. There he was, standing still, half hidden between two maples, watching. He didn't move until I whispered, "Dad." Then, without a word, he walked toward the house while I stayed frozen at the door. Up close, he looked older again, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, soldier's composure crumbling at the edges. He stepped past me into the living room, scanning every corner, movements automatic, just like a man clearing a battlefield. "Why here?" I asked finally. "Why bring all this home?" He looked around the room quietly. "Because home is where they took the most from me." Mom came down the stairs slowly, her breath shallow. She looked terrified, not of him, but of what his presence meant. "Mason," she said softly, "please don't do this here." He faced her, calm but unyielding. "I kept this house haunted with what they did, but no more. After tonight, no ghosts left." She shook her head. "You can't cleanse blood with more of it." "I'm not spilling blood," he said. "I'm spilling truth." He took a folded folder from inside his jacket and laid it on the table between them. "You wanted answers. Here they are." Inside were court files, sealed transcripts, transfer documents, and at the bottom, an authorization form signed by none other than Judge Victor Hale. Mom read the first line aloud, voice trembling. "Authorization for troop disbandment under exceptional deception protocol." She stopped mid-sentence, eyes wide. Her mouth fell open. These were fake discharges. He never meant to rescue anyone. He meant to erase you. Mason nodded slowly. "They left us in that desert to die because we knew what he did. And when I crawled out, the judge made sure to bury the survivors in paperwork." He looked at me then. "That's who's on my list now. The architect behind it all." Mom collapsed back into the chair, whispering, "You're going after Hale alone?" "No," he said, turning toward me. "We are." Her voice broke into a desperate cry. "You can't drag him into this, Mason. He's not your soldier." He stared at me, unblinking. "He's my son." The silence after that cracked something old and buried between them. The years, the fear, the lies. I could feel it. Her love for him still flickered under the ashes of rage. I finally said, "Then tell me what to do." He pointed at the folder. "Read. Learn. When the time comes, speak. The truth needs someone younger than me to carry it." He left again before dawn, leaving the folder behind. I went through every page until my eyes blurred. Operation Iron Wind, blacked out names, lines redacted by government censors. But one unmarked note stood out. A memo addressed directly to the presiding judge. Mission detail erased as agreed. Civilian witness neutralized. Wife relocated under false identity program. I read it twice before it sank in. Wife relocated. That wasn't standard cover-up language. That was code. It meant my mother had been moved into a new life after the mission ended, under government protection. She wasn't just an innocent bystander. She'd been part of the silence. The realization hit like a crack through glass. I went upstairs where she stood by the window, staring at fog creeping through the yard. "You were part of it," I said quietly. "Weren't you?" Her shoulders slumped. "I didn't know everything. I just signed what they told me to." Hale came to me after Mason's death notice. He promised protection. For you, for me. I thought it was mercy. "He used you," I said. Her tears broke free. "And I used that lie to survive." Downstairs, a noise, soft, hollow, made both of us freeze. The front door was open again. Light flickered from the hallway. I crept forward, heart hammering, and saw what Mason had left on the floor: the judge's file, photograph, and beneath it, a single new stopwatch. Still running. Set at 9 minutes. Mom knelt beside it, whispering through clenched teeth. He's doing it tonight. He's going to the courthouse tomorrow morning. He'll confront the judge before they can silence him again. I looked out the window into the fog. It felt alive now, breathing, pulsing with all that unresolved justice moving toward one inevitable end. Somewhere out there, my father's steady footsteps were counting the same rhythm as the ticking clock left at our door. 9 minutes. That's all the justice he ever allowed himself. And this time, the march wasn't leading to another crawl in the dirt. It was heading straight toward the courthouse steps, where ghosts and men were about to finally face each other under the same light. The courthouse sat like a monument built on old skeletons: white marble, glass doors, security cameras blinking red. The morning haze had barely lifted when I got there. Crowds gathered along the sidewalks: reporters, officers, curious spectators whispering the same name under their breath: the Ranger. They were waiting for a ghost to show up where ghosts weren't meant to exist. Inside, Judge Victor Hale prepared for another public appearance, calm, powdered, camera ready. He smiled politely at journalists who didn't know that Smile had already signed death warrants decades ago. I stayed across the street tucked in a cafe window, phone open with a message I'd woken to at 4:03 a.m. Stay out of the courthouse until you hear the sirens. Then walk in. You'll understand. No name, no signature, just the pattern of someone who'd lived his life through silent orders. When the sirens finally cracked the morning stillness, rising from blocks away, I knew the signal had come. I crossed the street, my pulse counting in sync with distant alarms. People stepped back as I pushed through the courthouse doors. Inside, everything felt too bright, like the building was pretending to be innocent. Officers rushed toward the back hallway, radios crackling. Then I heard it, a voice echoing faint but firm down the marble corridor. "Do you remember Iron Wind, Your Honor?" Hill's reply came shaky, strained. "Who are you? You have no authority here." I followed the sound, heart scraping against my ribs, until I reached the courtroom chamber where it all unfolded. Mason stood at the defense table, still and unarmed. His presence filled the room even without volume. Rain-soaked clothes, face hollow with exhaustion, eyes steady on his target. Across from him, the judge trembled behind a half-circle of uniformed guards. Mason raised his hand slowly, no weapon in sight. He wasn't here to kill. He was here to speak. 13 years, he said evenly. 13 years since you ordered 6 of your own to bury me in a hole. 13 years since you told them my silence would protect this country. The judge swallowed, voice faltering. You think anyone will believe this? A discharged ranger, unstable, desert trauma. Don't you dare say trauma like it's weakness. Mason interrupted. You made loyalty a death sentence. You created men who thought honor was something you buy. I slipped through the door quietly. The air pulsed with tension. Hale reached for composure. You're making a mistake. There are consequences for. Mason slammed his hand on the desk. Consequences? His voice cracked. You want to talk about consequences? Try clawing your way out of your own grave because your commander decided you were disposable. He took a step forward, every inch of motion deliberate. The guards didn't move. They were listening now. You made them believe I stole classified intel, Mason continued. But I took nothing. You forged those logs to hide your war crimes in Iron Wind. Hale's mask faltered for a moment, his voice turning sharp. You can't prove that. I don't have to, Mason said, pulling out a small USB drive and placing it on the desk. They can. That's when I saw them. The reporters outside the door, holding up their phones. The microphone's already on. He'd planned this perfectly. Every word, every second, broadcasted live. Hale's composure cracked. You set me up. No, Mason said. You did that the day you left me bleeding in the desert. The judge stood up. rage flaring through politeness. You disobeyed direct command. You sold your unit for oil contracts. Mason snapped, his voice loud enough to shake the room. And when your men realized what you did, you silenced them one by one. Silence followed, thick, suffocating. Then Mason whispered, "Tell them what you told the others before you sent them home to die." Hale kept his mouth shut. So Mason triggered the small recorder clipped to his pocket. Hale's own voice filled the courtroom, older but undeniably his, pulled from the files I'd seen the night before. "Leave him. We'll call it a training failure. A man like Mason Lee is a liability. No soldier survives betrayal." The judge's face drained color. Mason let it play, eyes unblinking. "That's your justice system on tape." The rot wearing a robe. By now, the sirens outside had stopped. The crowd beyond the glass doors pressed closer, phones lifted, cameras rolling. Hale's empire collapsing not by bullets, but by truth. Mason turned toward me finally, his son, standing among witnesses. "You see now, Logan? You don't fight betrayal with weapons. You expose it." He looked back at the judge. "You took my years. But today you crawl." Hale's face contorted. He tried to push through the guards, but they didn't move for him. The power had shifted. He stumbled, tried to reclaim dignity, but the floor of his empire was already gone. Then, for the first time, the great judge, the man who'd condemned dozens with a wave of his hand, slowly lowered himself onto his knees. The crowd gasped. Cameras clicked. No one touched him. No violence. Just shame made physical. His voice trembled. "You think this fixes anything?" Mason leaned close. "No, but it frees us." He turned to me one last time, nodding slightly before walking toward the door. The guards didn't stop him. They couldn't. He wasn't escaping. He was finished. But before he could leave the building, a single shot cracked through the chamber. Hale's last desperate act. The sound ripped the air apart. Mason staggered once, a bloom of red spreading across his shoulder. He didn't fall. He just turned around long enough to say, almost peacefully, "You can bury the man. You can't bury the truth." Officers swarmed in seconds, tackling Hale, shouting orders, dragging him down. Mason slipped through the chaos and out the side door before anyone realized he was gone. By the time I reached the alley behind the courthouse, rain had started again. Mason sat against the brick wall, breathing heavy, holding his arm. Blood seeped through his sleeve, but his eyes were clear. I knelt beside him, trying to press the wound. "You need a hospital." He shook his head slowly. "No hospitals. No records. It's done." He looked at me through those dim gray eyes. "You saw it, didn't you? The truth, finally on its knees." I couldn't speak. I only nodded. He smiled faintly, whispering, "Then my time's up." When the police lights washed down the alley in blue flashes, he pressed something into my palm. The old stopwatch he'd carried since I was a kid. "Still ticking. Keep it running," he said. Then he pushed himself to his feet and disappeared into the fog just as the officers stormed the street. No one ever found him after that. Inside the courthouse, the judge sat cuffed and pale, the cameras still filming. His words echoed one last time in my head. "You think this fixes anything? Maybe not." But for the first time, the city stopped whispering about revenge. They started whispering about truth. And somewhere out there, in the fog and the rain, a father was finally free enough to let his ghosts rest. The world slowed down after that shot. The echo ricocheted through every wall in the courthouse, every headline waiting outside, every piece of my chest. They said Judge Victor Hale survived, but his career didn't. Mason had carved the truth into daylight, and now the system that once worshipped men like Hale was choking on exposure. But no one knew where my father went. No hospitals reported him. No body turned up. Just rumors. The ranger bleeding through fog. The soldier who made men confess with silence. He became legend before morning. Mom didn't believe in legends. She believed in blood and reality. For days she stayed glued to the radio, waiting for the only kind of confirmation that mattered, his voice. But silence grew like mold in our house. By the third night, I couldn't take it. The world wanted to forget him. I couldn't. So I followed the only clue I had left, coordinates scribbled on the back of the stopwatch he'd given me. It led me deep into the woods outside Iron Ridge, the same forest where he used to train me as a kid. 9 miles off-road. No sound except the whisper of branches shifting under wind. Fog rolled low and thick, swallowing my breath. At exactly 9 p.m., the stopwatch ticked down its first second. My entire body froze. Then I saw it. Through the trees, light flickering from an old ranger outpost long abandoned. I stepped closer. Its door hung crooked, like someone had forced it open too many times. The faint glow came from inside, a lantern burning dim on a wooden table. And there he was. Mason sat on an old chair facing the window, half in dark, half in dawn's reflection. His arm was bandaged crudely. Blood had dried into his sleeve, but his eyes were alert, oddly peaceful. He looked nothing like the man who haunted the news. He looked like someone waiting for time to catch up. When he noticed me in the doorway, he smiled faintly. 9 minutes late. I didn't get your message until sunrise, I said, stepping closer. He pointed to the stopwatch. Still ticking. I nodded. Always. He gestured to the seat opposite. Sit. The room smelled of oil and old paper. Maps covered the wall, lines drawn across state borders, names crossed out neatly. I noticed one last red mark at the center, our hometown. What is this? I asked. He leaned forward, resting both elbows on his knees. The cleanup. The ones who buried the evidence. The ones who signed the lies. They all live in the same circles. Hale wasn't the final crawl. He was just the first one that mattered publicly. I felt my stomach twist. You said it was over. He nodded quietly. I did. But there's still one record unbroken. Mine. I frowned. What record? He looked out the window. 9 minutes. Lightning flashed somewhere distant, turning the sky into a photograph. His expression didn't change. When I was left in that desert, he said softly, I counted. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. But I counted. Every crawling second until those men came back to finish what they started. 9 minutes. That's how long it took for them to realize I wasn't gone yet. That's how long I've lived since, between dying and surviving. 9-minute stretches. He looked at me again. Now, I'm ready for the last one. My chest tightened. You're not dying out here. He chuckled lightly, the sound fragile. We all die somewhere between the first betrayal and the last apology. Don't worry. This isn't suicide. It's closure. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a letter, the same handwriting as the one left on our doorstep years ago. He slid it toward me. For her, he said. I turned the envelope over. Mom's name was written across it, Ivy. He continued. She'll understand why I couldn't stay. And you'll deliver it when the clock stops. No, I said quietly. You can deliver it yourself. He smiled again, shaking his head. You still think this story ends in daylight. It doesn't. Some men are built for silence, Logan. Your job is to break it. Mine was to hold it long enough for you to live honest. The stopwatch beeped quietly on the table. The timer read 9 minutes. He pressed the button. Then listen, he said softly. The ticking filled the room, rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat. For the first minute, neither of us spoke. The sound became everything. Rain against the metal roof, wind threading through window cracks, each tick another piece of his past dissolving. Minute 3, he murmured. That's when you start to see faces. The ones who followed orders thinking they'd never pay for them. His breath faltered at minute 5. I wanted to stop the clock, but his hand rose, shaking his head. No interruptions. You have to let the crawl finish. At minute 7, he looked straight at me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen. All this time, people thought I wanted revenge. But that's not true. I just wanted them to know who we were before they turned us into headlines. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. 9 minutes isn't long, but it's enough for confession. When the watch finally beeped a long final tone, the storm outside broke. Rain poured hard against the windows. Mason closed his eyes for a moment. There, he whispered. Now it's finished. He took a deep breath, stood up, and handed me the stopwatch again. Don't reset it, Logan. Every time you hear silence, let it tick in your head. That's the sound of everything we refuse to bury. I looked at her, at the morning sun creeping over the wet trees. He said everything he ever did was so the truth could outlive both of us. She broke down then, not in pain, but in relief. The kind you feel when a long war ends, even if the victory costs everything. I turned the stopwatch over in my hand, feeling the chill of its metal settle into my palm. Somewhere between the first and the last tick, I realized he'd taught me what justice really was. Not punishment, not vengeance, but remembrance. The kind you don't shout through headlines. The kind that crawls quietly back home, on its own time. The forest was silent again. No wind, no rain. Just that strange calm that comes after the storm has already made its point. When I walked back up the porch steps, Mom was still on the swing, clutching his letter like it was made of glass. The sun was rising behind her, turning the raindrops on her hair into faint sparks of gold. Neither of us said a word for a long time. Finally, she opened the envelope with trembling hands. The paper inside was short, creased, written in that rough, blocky handwriting we both knew by heart. You don't heal by forgetting. You heal by remembering without anger. If this world ever teaches our son one thing, let it be that truth doesn't need fire. It just needs time. 9 minutes at a time. That's how long it takes for hate to turn into peace. Mason, when she finished, she held the paper to her chest and whispered. He finally came home. I looked out toward the tree line, where the fog had started to lift. It was exactly where I'd last seen him, between two old maples, the same spot where he used to wait when I came home from school. For the first time, that patch of shadow didn't feel haunted. It felt empty in a good way, like he'd left the ghosts and taken the anger with him. Weeks passed. The judge resigned. A public investigation opened. Every secret file about Operation Iron Wind spilled across newsrooms. For once, the truth didn't crawl, it ran. But I couldn't bring myself to talk about Mason publicly. He belonged to us, to those quiet nights, to the broken clock that still sat by the window, frozen at exactly 9 minutes. That was his peace marker, his proof that some wars aren't fought with bullets, but with endurance. Mom started volunteering at a local clinic. She said helping others was her way of finishing what he started without the blood. I stayed behind the camera, turning his story into words I could handle. Just narration, just sound, so people could hear what silence feels like when it finally breaks. Sometimes I replay his last words in my head. You can't bury the truth. And every time I do, I realize he wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about all of us. Because sooner or later, whether we deserve it or not, truth crawls its way back home. It might take 9 minutes or 9 years, but it always finds what it's looking for. So when people ask what happened to the ranger who made guilty men crawl, I tell them one thing. He didn't disappear. He just became the silence that keeps the rest of us honest. Brief pause in voiceover, softer tone. And maybe tonight, if you stand outside near the woods and the wind shifts just right, you might hear the faint tick of a stopwatch hiding somewhere in the dark, counting down the seconds between forgiveness and memory. That's where he lives now, in the sound of unfinished time. Now tell me something. When you heard this story, did it make you think of someone you once wished could get their justice too? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what kind of stories you love to see next. Heartbreak, betrayal, or quiet revenge. Because the next one will be another thriller that hits straight through the heart. And hey, if this story stayed with you for even a moment, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that truth always finds its way home. Until the next story, take care of yourself and your truth. It always knows how to crawl back.